Hello, everybody. This is George Anastasopoulos, and I'm welcoming you to our webinar titled The New ISO IEC 17024 and the Future of Competence Certification of Persons. So I am the Technical and International Business Development Manager of PJLA, and I will be very happy to be with you also this month. Every month we are providing an interesting, I believe, webinar, but this week's webinar, this month's webinar is much more interesting to me because it is about a standard that I really enjoy working, and I'm involved for many years. So before we start with the standard, let me introduce myself and my company. As I told you, I'm working as a technical manager on PJLA. PJLA is the Johnson Laboratory Accreditation. Incorporated is a accreditation body based in the United States, in Troy, Michigan. We offer our services globally with more than 2,200 accreditations in 32 countries in the world. And we offer our programs in different categories of accreditation, like the first program that we introduced in 1999 was 17025 for testing and calibration laboratories. And then we offer programs like inspection bodies accreditation 17020, product certification bodies 17065, proficiency in testing providers, reference material producers, medical laboratories, training providers, and of course, the subject of the day, personnel certification bodies or certification bodies of persons, to be more precise, according to ISO IEC 17024. So let's go to our topic for today, which is ISO 17024, the new version of the standard. And we are expecting any moment now, and this is true, to get the version 2026, 17024 2026. So this presentation is based on the final draft international standard that it was issued a few days ago. And as we all know, a final draft standard does not introduce new requirements to the final version. So probably maybe some type or some editorial changes, but the requirements will be the same. So the final draft is setting the actual requirements. So as I told you at the beginning, the first version was introduced in 2003, and I told you that this standard is probably my favorite conformity assessment standard, and this is because I followed it up from this year, 2003. I was actually involved on the draft of the new standard that was issued in 2004, and I was working that time in Europe in a personnel certification body that it was the first globally to be accredited under 17024 in 2004. So I'm very proud of that, and that's why I love so much this standard. I worked to develop it in the ISO Casco committee. I developed the first globally accredited management system, and I follow it up now from the accreditation level. So the version we have right now was introduced in 2012. So there was still some time that it was not updated. So now it is time, and we have a major update, which is really important. And today I will go through that revision and provide you the latest news about that. So the first important issue about this standard is it is fully now compatible with the Casco 33 procedure 33 structure, and this means that it will be very similar to the other more recent 17,000 series of standards. So if, for example, you are familiar with the new 17025 for labs, you will see that now the new 17024 will have a very similar structure. And this is because this ISO Casco procedure 33, we call it common elements in ISO Casco standards terminology. It means that this document is introducing some structure, I can say a skeleton of common elements in all the conformity assessment standards developed by ISO Casco. And of course, the 17024 now, the latest revision, is fully compatible, compliant with this structure. That means it is very similar with the other modern standards of the series. Of course, it is updated in terminology issues, the structure, the schemes, the scheme approach, and of course, it reflects all requirements that are introduced by this common element ISO Casco policy procedure. The new, also another of the main new elements is reflects the digital transformation in certification of persons. Of course, from 2012 until now, it's so long time, and yes, the digital transformation is an essential element now from the certification process, from the conformity assessment process. So the ISO Casco standards are handling that, are starting considering the new technology, the new requirements as introduced, for example, by technologies like artificial intelligence in certification, and 17024 is here to address all these new necessities, I could say. In addition, it strengthens impartiality, security, transparency, and governance in the certification bodies of persons. Now, the structural changes, according to the common elements procedure of ISO Casco, is reflected on the structure of the standard. So now we have a structure, as I told you, very similar to the other modern ISO 17000 of standards, that it starts from general. Then we have the structural requirements, the resources requirements, records and information requirements, recertification requirements, certification process requirements, and finally the management system requirements. As I told you before, if you are familiar with 17025, this will sound to you very, very equivalent, similar. Also, there is a significant reordering of the process clauses, the process requirements clauses, and the flow is described like the following. We start from the assessment process, the application, examination, decision, and recertification process. Very similar like 17065 and the other standards. Now, the management system clauses requirements are reorganized in clauses starting from 10.1 to 10.7, and the documented information clause 10.7 replaces the previous documents and records clauses. So let's see what are the key new updated terms. The first obvious new, because it was not existing 12 years ago, it is the artificial intelligence element. So it's not a standard related to artificial intelligence, but the standard is addressing the cases, the situations where the artificial intelligence may be used from the conformity assessment bodies, the certification of persons. Now, is it a requirement? No, it's not. You don't have to use artificial intelligence, but in case you're using artificial intelligence in the process, you have to address some specific requirements described in the standard. The standard also is introducing the new definitions for invigilation, which is expanding for remote and online modes, because now we have many online, for example, examination we didn't have, again, 12 years ago. So the remote evaluation, remote examination, remote testing, call it whatever you want, needs invigilation. So the standard is addressing this new technology requirement again, okay? It is aligned with ISO 17030 about the certification mark, how to use the certification mark. We had that before very strongly in 17065. Now it is very clear, referenced in 17024. It defines also the bias, that it is defined in order to support fairness in the process of examination for personnel certification. It gives definitions about the certified person when we consider a person certified, about competence, outcome, validity, and reliability of the process. So the standard follows the terminology per the ISO IEC 17030, okay, which sets the general requirements for third-party marks of conformity. Now, the clauses 4 and 5 of the standard are setting the impartiality requirements. And the monitoring now is expected, the monitoring by the certification body of persons, to include risks related to technology, artificial intelligence bias, and digital assessment environments, as I told you before, the invigilation, for example, process. Now, all those are new, because all those are related to technology. They were not there before, and they are issues that we have to address on the impartiality issues. This means that we have a good understanding of those, not only terms, but of those technological, I could say, effects. For example, the artificial intelligence bias is a very significant element that it can introduce problems in the process of utilizing artificial intelligence mechanisms, tools. And in order to handle it, it means you have to have an understanding what do we mean by bias, how bias is introduced in artificial intelligence models, and how it can be handled. So it is not so simple to say, okay, AI bias is existing. Yes, it is existing, but in order to handle it, you should have an understanding of the, let's say, the root cause of this risk and what that means. So we are expecting, from my part now as an accreditation body that I work on that level, I'm expecting from the personnel certification bodies to be in a position not only to address these technology issues, but in order to address them, to understand them. And it is an element that needs not only appropriate risk analysis, but also the competence of personnel of the certification body related to this issue. So how you handle AI bias, you should understand AI bias. How you handle digital assessment environments, you should understand the risks involved with this process. So identifying, eliminating, and minimizing the threats related to those risks should be specific in your analysis. Also, additional risks not related to technology is the trainer-examiner separation that now is evidence-based and not rule-based. And that was always, before, that was always an issue on the 17024 Technical Committee in ISO CASCO, the probability or the possibility that a certification body of persons may be also involved in corresponding training. So training that leads or is used as part of the process of certification of person, and how it is independent to the examination that it is needed in order to provide the certification. And the model is very clear, and the new standard makes it even more clearer in the correct direction. So the requirements of related bodies delivering training are much more better defined, I would say, in that version. Yes, I know there are many of you out there that believe that certification bodies of persons should not provide any training, that it is a direct conflict and should not be there. But as long as it is there, we have to, our work now is not to criticize the standard, but our work here is to explain it. So we have to follow those requirements, and as an accreditation body, we are always very strict on that. And we try to explain you that this process is a very sensitive process on the certification of persons, considering that obviously, if the certification body of person is providing training related to this certification, it is introducing automatically impartiality risk. Now, in the clauses 6.1 to 6.4 personnel, we have the introduction of more prescriptive competence management framework. I would like here to remind you that when we say competence on 17024, we have two different points of view. It is the competence of the people we are going to certify, but this course is not, this clause is not about this. This clause is about the competence of the staff or the people who are involved, the personnel who are involved in this process. So yes, personnel certification bodies of persons evaluate the competence of the candidates, but they also have a requirement in the standard about the competence of their own people. And this is the requirement here. And it is important that now all personnel that is influencing the certification process of persons is covered by the standard. Because I remember in the past we had questions, there is no requirement about invigilators, and are invigilators examiners, but invigilators don't develop exams. So there was all this long discussion. Now it's finished. Now we have clear definition and clear setting of definition of what is the personnel influencing the certification, and it includes examiners, item writers, subject matter experts, invigilators, translators, interpreters, contractors or outsourced bodies, everybody, of course, on the level of his participation in the process of personnel certification. So we have to define as a certification body of patrons what is the role of each different person in the process, and identify what are the competence requirements. Of course, the performance monitoring, it was there before and it is still required, and the competence evidence, it was there before, must be maintained as documented information. So we expect as an accreditation body to see records regarding the competence of personnel. Now, in 6.5 is a brand new clause about governance of artificial intelligence. So the certification bodies here, they must have to do some things like identify any use of artificial intelligence in their certification process. So they have to be sure when it is and when it is not involved. And sometimes they say, okay, we don't have AI, and you go and you see that they use AI to develop test questions, for example, which is high risk, again, process. So it's not the purpose of the presentation today to enter in depth in AI. Probably we need to have another webinar specific on AI applications in conformity assessment. But in that case, I could say that even simple implementation of AI, utilization of AI tools can introduce some risk and should be controlled, okay? And we have to be in position to validate all AI outputs through subject matter experts. This is important. I had the opportunity to attend a big conference a few months ago in the Quality Conference of China in Beijing, and there were many interesting presentations about utilization of artificial intelligence in examination of persons. And it was very interesting to see that when the certification bodies are utilizing AI, developing examination, for example, or models of examination, there is still a very high failure rate of the AI models. I saw when I attended in this conference studies that they could show that the different AI models can introduce errors from 70% to 90% or 95%, but even 5% is too much to be left. So this means validation of AI output should be there all the time, and don't depend on the AI authority, I could say, because it will still is not so evolved, and it's still introducing a significant percentage of errors, mistakes. Also, I've seen as a creditor many cases that we have non-conformities. The companies sometimes, our clients are using AI, and it's very to understand because you can see clauses, references to clauses of the standard that are non-existent. Because the way that AI is working is not validating its output by itself. It's not performing a quality control. So it is guessing and sometimes is extrapolating the knowledge it is using and is producing results that they are totally false. It's not that it provides you a wrong clause, it provides you a non-existing clause. So your quality control, the validation of any output of AI is very significant, and that's why I'm emphasizing on that. So as an accreditor, if I see that you are utilizing AI process, definitely I'm going to ask to see what is the validation process you follow to be sure that the results are correct. Then maintain evidence of fairness, reliability, and impartiality. So those definitions, the fair exam, for example, reliable process or impartial, it was there before. What we are asking now in the new update of the standard is to verify that it is not affected by use of AI. So it is still there. And this is not always so easy. And then ensure continuous human oversight. We cannot, as I told you before, fully depend on AI. AI can be a useful tool, but we have to ensure a continuous human oversight and documented the risk assessment of each AI tool used and inform candidates that AI is used if it is used. So examples that I would like to give you that we can see AI implementation in certification of person is in auto-scoring, facial recognition during the examination or before the examination, remote monitoring, automated item generation, test generation, okay, pattern detection to understand if there is cheating and so on. And I want to repeat once again, we are not against the usage of AI. The opposite. AI is a tool that it came in our life and it will remain. What we want to do is to understand the limitations of AI models and the potential problems. That's why the technical committee is introducing, of ISO-CASCO is introducing all these elements there to safeguard the process, that the process remains valid. And I would like to stay on the element that ensured continuous human oversight. Use the tools, but always control them and evaluate them and validate them and check them through human process. And you should know also that we cannot have a mistake on this process. I mean, we cannot leave to AI do things that we are not confident that they are correct. And because, as I told you, AI does not perform quality control by itself, does not validate the results, we have to do it. Now, a very interesting topic, I could talk for long about this, but I have to proceed to the next step, which is the clause 7.2 public information. I had to tell you at the beginning, I didn't tell you that this webinar is not a full training on 17.024. It's not possible to do that on 45 minutes. This webinar is designed to introduce you the changes from the previous standard to the new standard. So if you have no clue about the standard, yes, through that webinar, you can understand some elements or some requirements of the standard, but it is not enough to provide you the full knowledge. If you are new in the standard, I suggest to proceed on a more in-depth training. This webinar is presenting just the changes from the old standard to the new standard. Public information, one more clause that we have to address. Certification body must publicly disclose for each scheme the following elements: scope of certification, prerequisites, application requirements, initial certification requirements, surveillance requirement, if there are any surveillance requirement applicable, recertification intervals and criteria and description of assessments. Similar to that there was before, but now it's much better coded and much clearer what you have to do. And as you noticed, I already used a few times the word scheme, which is now a standard term in the ISO-CASCO terminology, which practically is what we used to call before certification programs. Now we're using the word schemes, and there are specific requirements in the ISO-CASCO standardization tools, how to develop schemes, how to evaluate, validate schemes. I have so many questions receiving about this scheme thing. So our next webinar, next month, it will be dedicated to scheme. And it will not be only about 17.024, it will be about the general approach on schemes under conformity assessment standards, ISO-CASCO, conformity assessment standards, which means schemes are used also in 17065 for certification of products and in management systems and so on. So next webinar will be dedicated to scheme validation, scheme development, and accreditation requirements for schemes from conformity assessment bodies. Let's come back to our topic. That was the requirement for public information. Now 7.3 and 7.4 clauses of standard, they're talking again about security and data protection, another clause which is related to information technology. Because now the digital and technology threats are increased, so the requirements of the standard are extended to security on how to include and how to handle digital and technology threats. And we are expecting stronger exam integrity controls, because now we have that we didn't have so strong, I mean, 15 years ago, 12 years ago, when the previous standard was developed, many online examinations and so on. So we need to be sure about the integrity of the examination, who is taking the examination, how we control the process. We have to have a clear justification of the required of non-real-time invigilation, because the risk is increased on the non-real-time invigilation. The standard does not say not to do that. It says you have to fully control the process. And also, a new threat that we have to handle is about data privacy. Because I remember 20 years ago when everything, all the tests were printed in paper, it was much more difficult to have leaks. Also that time we had, but it was not so high risk. But now with all the electronic examination, everything, it's not only protection, of course, of the examination, but it's also protection of the personal information of the candidates who participate in the process of examination, and also the records that the electronic records that are kept by the certification body of persons related to the competence of candidates. So this is personal information. So we have examination data to be protected, and we have personal data to be protected, and the specified approach on that is required. So threats regarding that topic is hacking attempts, system vulnerabilities, candidate impersonation in the exam process, this one, unauthorized aids, data leakage, cheating, all these things that with electronic, in the electronic age, are much more evidence. I could say that those issues, those risks are high risks in the online examination, but also if you have on-site examinations, you still have to take care of the potential risks. Even if you do on-site examination, you should, for example, be sure you don't have candidate impersonation. You have to be sure that the person who is taking the exam is the person who is supposed to take the exam. Proceeding now to clause 8 about certification schemes. Core concepts that aren't changed, we had them before, but now they are becoming much more explicit, is about job and practice analysis, competence profiles, assessment alignment, and subject experts involvement. So those are terms on the initial, in 2003 version of the standard, they were not there at all. They were introduced on the 2012 version of the standard on a more, I could say, primitive version. But now all these market terms are here, very specific and very well explained. So we have to be fully familiar with these concepts and implement it through our management system, through our system of certification of persons. So it is helpful on this process is the Annex A of the standard, which is informative, but it is providing principles for certification of persons, and it will help you better understanding these concepts. And also regarding the schemes, the certification schemes, very useful is the MD25, the guidance, it's not guidance, it's mandatory document from the IAF called Criteria for evaluation of conformity assessment schemes. I would like to mention that this is a document not for the certification bodies of persons, it is for the accreditation bodies. But why it is useful, even if you are still a certification body of persons, to be aware of it, because this document is telling to the accreditation bodies, guys, go and check these issues. So when it says go and give emphasis on these issues and check those issues, automatically those are issues that they have to be implemented or performed by the conformity assessment body, the certification body of persons. As I told you in the next webinar regarding schemes, certification schemes, I will explain in depth also the requirements on them D25. So make a note to see when it's going to be, when we're going to release the date for the next webinar in approximately 1 month about certification schemes, and I'm inviting you to attend it. But anyway, the Annex A of 17024 and MD25 of IAF are providing very useful support and information to understand about the certification schemes requirements of the standard. And when you develop the scheme, what you have to do also when you are using a third-party scheme, because also in certification of schemes, we may use third-party developed schemes. For example, the first IAF scheme that was recognized was the IPC scheme, the International Personnel Certification Association scheme for management system auditors. So many of, as an accreditation body, I see that many of our accredited certification bodies that they certify management system auditors for 9001, 14000, they are using the IPC scheme because it is the IAF recognized scheme. But this is not a scheme developed by the certification body. It is a third party. So there are requirements how also to handle third party developed schemes. And you have to be aware of them. So independently, if you develop your personnel certification scheme, or you're using another certification scheme from another third party scheme owner, as we call them, still clause 8 applies, and you have to do different things in each situation respectively. Your scheme documentation in any case should be comprehensive and consistent, and if you're using your own scheme, the standard is much more demanding. You have to do more things. It's becoming more difficult. So technically, it is better to use a third-party scheme if it is out there, if it is existing, and even better if it is endorsed by IAF. Because if it is endorsed by IAF, then you are allowed to utilize also IAF logo and so on, which becomes much more interesting. So in any case, certification schemes is one of the difficult elements to handle, and you have to invest time to understand exactly the requirements of the standard. Now, clause 9 of the standard is introducing the certification process, which is the main process of certification of persons. Okay, it has 9 sub-clauses: the assessment process, the application. Assessment process is a general description. Okay, application is how we receive applications from the client, the persons, the delegates to be certified. Examination, and examination can be any type of examination, because many people are thinking about examination about written. It cannot be only written. It can be demonstration, it can be simulation, it can be written, it can be on-site view. Okay, so we have different types to examine competencies, how we take the certification decision, how we suspend or withdraw certificates, what is the recertification process, how we use certificates and marks, appeals and complaints. Now, of course, this is the basic structure of a certification body of person, and that was there before, of course, obviously on the previous standard. Now, what we have a very clear process, 2 steps to understand which is first, which is second, and so on. And each one is much more explained, much better explained, I could say. So the key expectations is the independence of decision makers in every stage, okay? we cannot accept only, again, I will repeat, artificial intelligence decisions. Human element should be present in all stages, and we should have clear timelines and impartiality controls. So those, I could say, are basic principles that should be present in all those 9 different steps. Combined, of course, with the rest requirements of the standard about the usage of technology, invigilation, and so on. So the process is described in clause 9. I could say, and definitely much better than any previous version of the standard. I like this version of the standard too much, and I could say that kudos should be addressed to the technical committee, that it was led by the excellent expert on the personnel certification, Ms. Cynthia Woodley, who was convener of the committee of ISO Casco, who developed this standard. Great work. Clause 10 is the management system. Management system. Now, if you are familiar with the other standards of the series 17025, 17065, and so on, this is very, very similar. Okay, now the management system gets the common elements approach of ISO Casco, setting explicit requirements that they define policies and responsibilities. Of course, management review with mandatory inputs and outputs, same thing like 17025, as I told you. Internal audits, corrective actions, actions to address risk and opportunities, and a clause about documented information. So I guess you are very familiar with that structure. Also, many procedures are removed. So the common elements approach, even from 5-6 years ago, in the management review, internal audits, corrective action, so on, there is, before we had requirement for procedures for all these elements. ISO, in order to reduce the bureaucracy, they removed the procedures, so there is no requirement for, but there are requirements for record. So when we say with mandatory inputs and outputs or internal audit, we still expect to see internal audits records or management review records, but the procedure is not a requirement, okay? So it can be a process that it is developed through training and so on. You don't have to have a procedure for that. But the output of the process is the evidence that the process is performed and it is still there. Okay? Risk management elements that they have to be considered, again, is risks related to AI, artificial intelligence, risk related to data security. I told you a few things before. Now we have here all the documents, records, and so on. So risks related to data security are very important. And of course, impartiality risks, that they are everywhere throughout all the processes of the standard. That's about the management system. And at the end, the standard, at this moment, and I will explain why I say so, there are 3 annexes, but they will be reduced to 2. The first annex is both annexes A and B are informative, and the Annex A, as I mentioned before, describe the principles for certification of persons. A very useful read. I suggest you go through that. It will give you a very good understanding of the basics of conformity assessment on the certification of persons. And also, Annex B, relationships between certification activities, gives a very nice mapping of the different elements of the processes related to personnel certification. And this is the certification activities. I call them processes, but they are similar, same things. And there is the third annex that we will not be there in the main standard, which is applicable only to European Union, not to European Union, I would say European accreditation members. And it is related to the regulation 765 and how it will be implemented in Europe. And because, of course, ISO standards are international, that was there to help the EA members to handle it, in Europe to handle the requirements of the standard, but it will be removed from the last version. So the official version of the standard will only include Annex A and Annex B. Both annexes, as I told you, are informative. They are not setting requirements. Now, you are a certification body of persons, and you may ask, okay, we have the new standard, what is going to be the transition and so on. In the next, in the meeting of IF, which is now, as you know, Global Accreditation Cooperation, official, when the standard is there, is out officially, an official transition period will be provided. And although from our experience and from inside information, we know it's not something I would like to release at this moment. I would wait for the official announcement, but there will be plenty of time. Okay, there is plenty of time for the certification bodies for persons to comply to the new standard requirements. Still, though, you can start working from now because, as I told you, the final draft is there. You can get the final draft, or you wait to buy, if you want, in a few months, the official standard. And based on the final draft, there will be no changes on the requirements. So you can start performing your gap analysis, a clause-by-clause mapping of the previous version and the new version. So this way you can understand what are the differences. Also, don't forget that many times the certification bodies, they are introducing their own requirements. So probably some of the new requirements are already there in your processes and procedures. So this standard, as all ISO standards in conformity assessment, they don't want you to change your way of thinking or the way you are documenting your management system. You can follow the method. It makes you feel better or fits better to the needs of your company. Still, though, the requirements should be addressed somewhere in your management system. So you have to compare clause by clause your management system with the new requirements and be sure that you are addressing all of them. And then you have to update your structure and terminology if needed because of the new requirements. For example, if you're using technology, you're implementing artificial intelligence in your system and so on the process of evaluation, on the examination and so on, you have to address that. And you have to address that in compliance to the standard, because as long as there were no similar requirements before, you may have a procedure, but you have to check that your procedure is compatible to the new standard requirements. So this needs some time to be sure that you comply to the new requirements. Also then, pay some attention to review the impartiality issues, your controls. If you have, if you developed your system many years ago and you introduced also technology, probably new risks are introduced in your system, you have to be sure that you are addressing all those risks. So it is important to go through this process about the impartiality controls. Then update scheme documentation as needed. And I say as needed because you don't have to, as I told you before, you don't have to follow the structure of the standard, but you have to address the requirements of the standard. So if you need to update your schemes to address the requirements of the standard on the scheme section, I mean, probably you have to do that. I don't say you should, but you have to check if you need to update. And then strengthen your digital exam security if needed again, if you have digital exams. You have to check versus the standard requirements if you comply to the security requirements are set by the standard. Update your website and your public information as needed. If you remember, I had the PowerPoint before that presented the public information that is required now by the new standard. So you are required to comply also to that. Check what information you have in your website. Check what information is required by the new version of the standard and update it accordingly as needed. Update your management review structure if needed. Train your staff to the new standard. And this is a very common non-conformity when we find when we have a new standard and we do the assessment as accreditation bodies, because the standard says your staff should be competent, and this means they should be competent also to the standard requirements. And the training of the staff, I know that you trained them to 17024 a few years ago, but if there is a new version, they have to be trained to the new version. And sometimes certification bodies, the quality manager is doing all the work, he or she is performing all these tasks I'm mentioning, but they don't transfer this knowledge to the staff. And the staff who is involved in 17024, they should be aware of 1704, at least the elements, they are affecting them. So as long as the standard is changing, the update training should be done. I don't say to do external, I don't say go away and spend money, I just say you have to train your staff. You can do it internally, you can train some of your quality people, and then they can train the other staff, you can do whatever you want. But what is important is that don't forget that the new standard automatically sets the requirement of the competence of your staff to the new standard, the knowledge of the new standard. So this is expected. Also, the training should be extended to other issues related. So if, for example, you have a risk, I gave you the example at the beginning of my presentation today, the risk of artificial intelligence bias. Then it's not a training related to 17024, but it is a training related to AI. What is AI bias? How you can handle a risk related to AI bias when you don't know what is AI bias? So then you need training on AI, not training on 17024. So have all these issues in mind. New technologies, when are they introduced, and the risks related to them, they may require training of your people to those issues, okay? So be aware, training is not only related to 17024, but to elements or requirements that they are generated through 17024. Important element, this one. And of course, prepare your accreditation transition package to address all those needs that you have to take care of in order to successfully transfer from your management system from the previous version to the new version. So those transition actions are common sense. And we are using them in all changes of the standards for all management systems. It's not only for 17024. When 17025 was introduced, we had to perform the same elements. Just now, we have all this AI and technology new issues that are here on this standard. And don't be surprised, all these requirements will be there also on the other conformity assessment standards when will be revised. So the ISO CASCO is following a modernization process and updates the standards consistently. Just the younger standards are much more technologically updated than the older ones. So these transition actions should be important for you, and you should be considered in order to do the transition. Still, as I told you, I'm going to have plenty of time for the transition, and it's not to be urgent, but what should be important, starting this process, you have to understand that you have to invest also in your training, because the elements of technology that are introduced on the new standard, if they are utilized by the certification body, should be supported by the appropriate training. So this is about the transition, and this I think I already had used 5 more minutes from my time, exceeded that, completes my presentation. I would be happy to reply to any questions you may add in the questions and answers elements. And I would like first to thank you for being present in my presentation today. I was checking the attendance list. I can see many people, very good friends I already know, and hopefully many new friends I will make in the future. The second element I would like to mention is that this was an update, but if you are not confident about your knowledge of the standard, you need a much more detailed training on 17024. And then on the next month, I will present a new webinar about the secrets, let's say, of the conformity assessment schemes as introduced in the conformity assessment standards. That training, the webinar, will not be only 17024 related, but it will be applicable to all management system ISO Casco standards, 65 and 20 and 21, sorry, and 20 and 24, wherever there is reference to schemes. And we will go through the main requirements for scheme development and also MD25, the mandatory document introduced by IF regarding schemes. So it will be a very interesting program. Now, I'm gonna check I don't see questions and answers. So it looks like that everything is clear and understood. Or you didn't pay so much attention to my presentation. Whatever is applicable, maybe both. Anyway, I'm joking. I don't see any questions. Now, those, as I always do, those PowerPoints are available to all of you. So if you want a copy of my presentation, you see my email on your screen. You can send me an email and I will be happy to provide you, either me or the Secretariat of PJLA, a copy of this presentation. You can email directly to me, or you can email the email that was included on the page where you registered, that it is the general page of PJLA training department. Also, this presentation will be applicable to YouTube channel of PJLA. We need some time to do that, but usually after 1 week, you can find the presentation in the internet. So if you want to use it for some of your associates, if you want to see it again, to clarify something, if you didn't join from the beginning and you would like to see everything, you are welcome to join our YouTube channel, PJLA, and over there you can find it. So there will be also a link on the training page of PJLA website at pjlabs.com. You see the address here. So all this know-how is provided for all our good friends, and the PowerPoint you can request for me directly with an email, and the whole video you can access it in a few days in our YouTube channel. So I would like once again to thank you. I don't see questions today. So let me check again. No more questions. And thank you very much for your attendance. And I will be happy to see you on the next webinar regarding schemes, conformity assessment schemes in the next month. Take care, everybody. And good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all of you, wherever you are all over the world. Thank you very much for your attention. Goodbye.